never thought my life would take such a turn. It wasn't long ago that I believed in love, in trust, and in the future I had with Kyle. But now, as I look back, I realize how wrong I was. The story of how my marriage unraveled is one of deceit, betrayal, and heartbreak. And it all started with a single decision: to let Kyle into my life. When I first met Kyle, he seemed perfect. He was 4 years younger than me, running a small cafe in Los Angeles, full of dreams and ambition. His eyes would light up whenever he talked about his plans for the future, how he wanted to expand the cafe, make it a hotspot in the city, and achieve financial success. I worked at a credit union, and Kyle had come in as a client. At the time, I was handling his finances, helping him secure loans for his business. We became close during that period, and it wasn't long before our professional relationship turned personal. We started dating after a few meetings outside of work. He seemed so caring, so full of life. I had almost given up on marriage in my mid-30s, but Kyle reignited a spark in me. He wasn't just a man with a vision for his business. He had a vision for us. Or so I thought. Within 6 months, we were married, and I thought I had found the happiness I had been waiting for. But the first cracks in our relationship began to appear shortly after we moved in together. We found a modest apartment, nothing too extravagant, but it was enough for the two of us. I had no complaints about our living situation, but I could tell Kyle wasn't entirely happy. He had always talked about wanting to live a luxurious life in LA, surrounded by wealth and success. It was subtle at first, but over time, his dissatisfaction with our lifestyle became more apparent. Still, I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind. I convinced myself that once his cafe took off, things would get better. We would have more money, more freedom, and Kyle would be happy again. But deep down, I knew something was off. There were moments when his eyes would linger too long on flashy cars, expensive homes, and the lives of people who had far more than we did. I tried to dismiss it as simple envy, but there was something darker lurking beneath. Then came the day that changed everything. My father, who had been living alone since my mother passed away, had taken a fall on the stairs. He was in his late 60s and still living in the high-rise condo my parents had bought many years ago. I had been visiting him less frequently since I married Kyle, but after his fall, I knew I had to step in. My father was fiercely independent, but I could tell he was struggling, even though he tried to hide it. When I told Kyle about my father's condition, I suggested that we move in with him to help out. It seemed like the right thing to do. After all, my father was getting older, and his health was deteriorating. I expected Kyle to resist the idea. After all, who wants to live with their in-laws? But to my surprise, he agreed almost immediately. "Let's do it," Kyle said, his face lighting up in a way that made me uneasy. "It'll be good for us, and it's close to my cafe too." I didn't think too much of it at the time. I was just relieved that Kyle was on board. We moved into my father's high-rise condo, and for a while, everything seemed fine. My father was grateful for the help, and Kyle appeared to be getting along with him. On weekends, I would drive my father around to the places he wanted to visit, and Kyle would take care of the house while we were gone. It felt like a good arrangement, one that benefited everyone. But then, slowly, things began to shift. Kyle's cafe wasn't doing as well as he had hoped. The income wasn't steady, and he became more reliant on my father's financial support. My father, who had rental income from other properties, was generous, offering to help Kyle with his business. But Kyle started to change. He began to distance himself from the responsibilities of the household. When my father became bedridden after another fall, Kyle's reluctance to help became more noticeable. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe Kyle was just stressed about the cafe, that he was tired from trying to make ends meet. But it wasn't just stress. It was something else. Kyle started to avoid caring for my father altogether. Even though he had agreed to live with us, to help out when I wasn't home, he started making excuses. "I have too much work at the cafe," he would say, or "I'm just not cut out for caregiving." I could feel the tension growing, but I didn't know what to do. My father had always been kind to Kyle, and it hurt to see him neglected in his time of need. I had taken on all the household responsibilities, cleaning, cooking, and caring for my father after long days at work. Kyle barely lifted a finger, and it made me angry. But I was too afraid to confront him. I didn't want to risk our marriage. Then, one day, I came home to find that my father's lunch, component placement which I had prepared in the morning, was still untouched in the kitchen. My heart sank. I rushed to his room, fearing the worst. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He smiled weakly and nodded. "I'm fine, Sophia. Don't worry, I didn't feel hungry today." I knew he was lying. He was trying to cover for Kyle, who had clearly neglected to take care of him. I wanted to confront Kyle, but I bit my tongue. Maybe this was just a one-time thing, I told myself. Maybe Kyle had genuinely forgotten, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. As the weeks passed, Kyle's neglect became more frequent. He stopped helping with my father altogether, and whenever I asked him to do something, he would snap at me. "Why do I have to take care of your dad? I never agreed to this," he yelled one night when I asked him to serve my father's dinner. "But you did agree," I reminded him, my voice trembling. "You said we would do this together." Kyle scoffed, rolling his eyes. "That was before I realized how much work it would be. This isn't my responsibility, Sophia. I didn't sign up to be a caregiver." His words cut deep, but I didn't argue. I was exhausted from working all day and then coming home to take care of my father. I didn't have the energy to fight with Kyle, but I couldn't ignore the growing resentment that was building inside me. Then, everything changed when my father passed away. It was sudden and unexpected, and I was devastated. My father had been my rock, the one constant in my life, and now he was gone. In the days following his death, I was overwhelmed with grief. But Kyle didn't seem to care. The night after the funeral, Kyle came to me with a smug look on his face. "So, now that your dad's gone, what happens to the high-rise condo?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes gleaming with greed. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" Kyle shrugged. "Well, it's yours now, right? I think it's only fair that I get it." My heart raced as I realized what he was saying. "You want my father's condo?" Kyle nodded, a cold smile spreading across his face. "I've been patient, Sophia. I've put up with a lot, and I think I deserve something in return." I felt sick to my stomach. "Kyle, this isn't about you. My father just died." But he wasn't listening. "Look, my parents are selling their house to move here, and they'll need a place to stay. The condo is perfect for them. Just hand it over, and we'll be done with all this." I couldn't believe his audacity. "You want me to give my father's condo to your parents?" Kyle's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Yes. And if you don't, we're getting a divorce." The words hung in the air like a threat. I felt a wave of disbelief and anger wash over me. This was the man I had married, the man I thought loved me. And now, he was revealing that all he cared about was the inheritance. Something inside me snapped. "Fine," I said, my voice calm but full of resolve. "Let's get a divorce." Kyle blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," I said, standing up. "I won't stay married to someone who only cared about my father's money. You can have your divorce, but you're not getting the condo." Kyle tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. I had already made up my mind. Over the next few days, I took legal action. I had sold the condo to my father's friend, Mr. Simpson, before Kyle could get his hands on it. When Kyle found out, he was furious. "You can't do this," he screamed. But it was too late. Mr. Simpson, who also happened to be a lawyer, made sure that Kyle had no legal claim to the property. Kyle tried to fight it, but in the end he lost. Not just the condo, but everything. In the months that followed, Kyle's life spiraled out of control. His cafe went under, and he was left with nothing. Meanwhile, I moved on. I sold the family home and bought a small apartment, starting fresh. It took time to heal from the betrayal, but I eventually found peace. My father had always taught me to stand up for myself, and in the end, that's what I did. I may have lost Kyle, but I gained something far more important: my freedom. And as for Kyle? Well, the last I heard, he was struggling to find work, bouncing from one job to the next. His parents, who had been so eager to move into the condo, were now renting a small apartment, scraping by on part-time jobs. Looking back, I realized that everything happens for a reason. Kyle came into my life, and for a while, I believed in him. But the truth always comes out in the end, and when it did, I was ready to face it head-on. Now, I'm free to live my life on my own terms, just as my father would have wanted. And that's all that matters.